been a while. I'm just gonna put on my shades of shame because it's been a long time. Hi guys, welcome to another true crime story time, where I tell you one true crime case that was solved using forensic science, all while doing, that's right, my makeup. This is the current setup situation because I'm in between places right now and I'm staying in my friend's place. Today's video will be featuring the Flame Rose palette from Delanchi Cosmetics. I believe this is an Amazon brand. A lovely subscriber gifted this to me and I just want to say thank you. I know she gifted it to me like, I don't know, 5 months ago, but I do receive everything you guys send to me. I'm just not at that current address, so I might get things a little bit later. You guys already know the drill. Everything that I'm using in this video is going to be linked in the description below. The comment section is a privilege. Don't fuck it up. Now let's get into today's case. This story all takes place in Newton, Connecticut in the year 1986, where 39-year-old Danish flight attendant Helle Crafts lived with her husband Richard Crafts. The couple had been married for 12 years. Richard worked as a pilot for Eastern Airlines, while Helle was a flight attendant for Pan Am. Richard Crafts was known to local law enforcement for his volunteer work as a police officer in Newton. He had also recently been hired that year as a part-time police officer in the town over, I believe it was Brookfield. The Crafts had 3 children together, and at this time in their marriage, sadly, it was not going well from the jump. Helle had suspicions that Richard was cheating on her and that he had had several affairs before. So he had already kind of had a reputation for going with other women. He would start doing things like coming home late and saying he would be in one place, but then he wouldn't be there. She also seen an unknown number on their phone bill that she didn't recognize that was calling long distance and for like hours on end. And she's like, who was this? So she decided to hire a private investigator named Keith Mayo to collect evidence of Richard's infidelity. So at this point, she kind of already knew, but you know, sometimes you just want to have that solid evidence to back you up. She provided all of the information that she had already collected on her own of his infidelity, and she gave it to the PI. And sure enough, during his investigation, the PI found Richard with another woman. Surprise, surprise, not really, because we already knew that. During his investigation, the PI found Richard in compromising positions, if you know what I mean, with another woman. Let's just say that it definitely was not his sister, okay? They were seen holding hands and walking together, kissing. The woman would occasionally rub down Richard's back. It was like that, babes. It was like that. Is this foundation matching today or? Okay, it's not bad. Once the PI had collected all the evidence that he needed, he went back to let Helle know of his findings. When he met with Helle and showed her all the photos and everything and what he had seen, she was devastated. She broke down crying. I mean, he said she was crying for a good 3 minutes. She just couldn't believe it, but she actually did believe it because she kind of knew he was doing it. So it's just like one of those things where even though you know it's happening, it doesn't really land and hit you till you see it in front of you, like in your face. Then you're like, oh yeah, he's actually doing that. That's actually happening. I think that's kind of what happened to her. So yeah, she was absolutely devastated. She was just crying in the car, but now she finally had the evidence that she needed to take the steps towards a divorce. I mean, she was just devastated because she knew her marriage was over at this point. I mean, this fool is out in public with this woman. This is what I don't understand. If y'all gonna do that, just be smart. Be a little bit more discreet. That's it. That's all, you know what I mean? I mean, of course, you know, you don't need to do that, but if you're going to be doing that, like, please don't let me find out about it. That's all I'm saying. Armed with the evidence she needed, she filed for divorce. Now, over the coming days, Helle would confide in friends and family members about the situation. She even wrote her mother a long letter that basically said that she wanted to get a divorce and things were not working out between her and Richard, that she found out about what he was doing and that she was planning to get a divorce and move out of there, that she was not like sticking around. She also told friends on her flight attendant crew, you know, the work friends, that she was getting a divorce and that if anything should happen to her, to please don't think it was an accident. I mean, that's kind of like famous last words. On November 16th, 1986, Helle had worked a long flight from Frankfurt, West Germany, and was heading back home. She caught a ride with her best friend, and her best friend dropped her off at her Connecticut home that she shared with Richard and her children. On November 16th, 1986, Helle had just worked a long flight from Frankfurt, West Germany, and she was heading home. She caught a ride with her best friend who dropped her off at her Connecticut home that she shared with Richard and her children. So she pulls up. Are you serious? Where? There's a church? So they pull up to the house and her friend drops her off in front. They say their goodbyes. Helle hugs her best friend and says goodbye, never to be seen again. Several days later, when Helle hadn't shown up to work for her next flight, coworkers got really concerned because, like I said, she had already been talking about Richard and the things that have been going on. And they didn't want to jump to conclusions, but they also wanted to be very cautious because this was not like Helle. Helle would not just go disappearing from work. You know, she was a very responsible young woman. She was a mother. There was just no way that she would do this and not even call. So they called her house and Richard answered the phone. And Richard is like, no, you know, she's not here. He told them that she went to Denmark to visit her sick mother. But later, when questioned, he would have a different story. He would say that she actually went on vacation to the Canary Islands with a friend. And then there was some instances when people would question him where he would just say he didn't know where she was altogether. I think he should have just stuck with that. Like, that would have probably been a better route than to be making up stories, because now you have 2-3 stories that she made up for no reason. Just say you don't freaking know. I mean, you know they're not gonna find her in the Canary Islands. You know they're not gonna find her at her mama's house in Denmark. You know that. So just be like, I don't know. But I'm not trying to help him. At this point, he was going around telling everybody that he didn't know where Helle was, but Helle's friends were not buying it. They just knew it was not like her, and one of her friends named Diane contacted the PI, Keith, that she had been working with, because the PI knew the entire story that was going on between her and Richard, and they had already off the rip expected Richard. According to friends, Richard had been known to have a temper and to get physically violent with Helle. Her friends claimed that he had hit her before. Now, when Helle's PI learned of her disappearance, he was convinced that Richard had something to do with it. Like, obviously, this guy had already had a reputation for doing terrible things to his wife. Now, at this time, Richard was volunteering as a constable in Newton. He was also working as a part-time police officer in the nearby town of Brookfield, or Sudbury. It's weird. I keep seeing 2 different towns. Some people say Brookfield, and then in some articles it says Sudbury, I think is how you pronounce it. Now, because he was buddies with law enforcement, they were reluctant to bring any charges or any sort of investigation against him. And, you know, it was their friend, so they were like, they wanted to stay out of it, which is sad because it's actually their job to get involved. So they turned the case over to the Connecticut State Police Department. Now, Helle's PI, he was really peeved because he couldn't sit idly by and watch Helle's case go like unnoticed, like unsolved. He could not do it. So he devised his own little plan, and he went to the nanny that worked for the Crafts, and he started to question her. And the nanny gave him some very, very incriminating evidence about Richard. She told him that she had seen a suspicious large dark stain on the carpet right after Helle's disappearance. And she said it was like a huge, like dark black, brown, maybe even red, she wasn't sure, stain. She said that the stain hadn't been there before, so she thought it was very bizarre. She also told him that shortly after that, Richard began ripping up large sections of the carpet. And when she questioned him about it and asked, he kind of ignored her and he gave no explanation whatsoever as to the reasons why he was ripping up large sections of the carpet, which again is very, very bizarre. Now, Richard had gone on vacation with his children, and while he was on vacation, investigators were able to obtain a search warrant to his home, and they began to search the residence. Okay, well, you know what? They're distant relatives today. They're not sisters, they're not cousins, they're not twins. While Richard was vacationing in Florida with his children, police obtained a search warrant for the property and was able to go inside and began looking around. Investigators found blood stains on the side of the mattress as well as missing sections of the carpet, like the nanny had told them. Also strange, a large freezer that had been kept in the Crafts' garage had also mysteriously gone missing. And credit card records showed that around the time that Helle had gone missing, the Crafts purchased new sheets and a new comforter. With further investigation, they discovered that Richard had also rented a wood chipper as well as a chainsaw. Yeah. How do you say he's guilty without saying he's guilty? Now, when Richard returned from vacation, police were waiting for him, and they brought him into the station for questioning. Now it's time to go into the palace. But anyway, back to the story. They administered a lie detector test on Richard, however, he passed. According to police, they say that he had little to no reaction to this at all. And during the test, they found no indication that he was being untruthful. So at this point, they had no solid evidence to link Richard to his wife Helle's disappearance. They had a lot of circumstantial evidence, but nothing solid. They needed more. So they brought in forensic expert Dr. Henry Lee. He was the director of the Connecticut State Police Forensics Laboratory, and he was super popular back then. A lot of people worked with this specific forensic expert, so it was really exciting because he was one of like the top. Now, the first thing Dr. Lee examined was the 5 stains left on the side of the mattress. They were so small that they were almost microscopic in size. Dr. Lee placed orthotolidine solution on the mattress fibers. Orthotolidine is a solution that can be used to help identify blood stains. Iron-containing hemoglobin has peroxidase activity, which in turn oxidizes the orthotolidine, helping crime scene investigators identify blood. If it is blood, the fibers will turn blue. I guess it's similar to luminol in that sense. The results came back positive for blood. Now they just needed to figure out whose blood it was. Was it Helle's blood or someone else's? Dr. Lee performed an antigen test. The blood was a type O, the same type as Helle Crafts. They were also able to tell that it was circulation blood and not menstrual, based on the blood spatter pattern. Dr. Lee came to the conclusion that the spatter was created at a 10-degree angle from someone leaning over the bed. They also found a blood smear about 6 inches in size along the side of the mattress. This told them that the person or item was moving at medium velocity through the air, consistent with an injury caused by a blunt object. Dr. Lee also tested the towels in the bathroom because they had recently been washed and they were like all hanging up. After exposing them to the orthotolidine, blue areas on the towels began to show up. And I mean, it was crazy. Basically, the towels had all been soaked in blood before they were washed and hung out to dry in the bathroom. But even with their new findings, investigators still had no body and no murder weapon. So how are they supposed to prove that something had happened to Helle, like a murder, or she had been harmed with no body and no weapon? It was just proving to be a little more difficult than they had thought that it would be. Even with all the circumstantial evidence, it was just extremely hard and they needed to get more. They had nothing to tie Richard to Helle's disappearance whatsoever. and it was starting to get difficult. So investigators searched police records. They wanted to find out if anyone had reported any strange sightings or anything bizarre that they may have witnessed, because I mean, they didn't really have anything at this point. And this is when they would get a break in the case, because the day that Helle had gone missing, it had been snowing out, and a snow plower, I cannot say this, a snow plower had reported some very strange activity on one of the highways. He said that he had seen a rental truck with a wood chipper attached to it, parked near Lake Zor. I haven't seen too many true crime things. I think there's only a couple things you could be doing with a wood chipper parked near a lake. When investigators spoke to the snowplower, he told them that he saw all this around 3 a.m. in the morning, and it was near the lake. It was by the bridge near the lake, and he saw a man dressed in some sort of orange jumpsuit. He thought it was bizarre, because like, who would be out in this weather in an orange poncho? Like, what were they doing with this huge wood chipper on, you know, the side of the bridge? He said about an hour later he saw that same wood chipper on River Road nearby, but not in the same area. So it was like somebody was obviously moving the wood chipper around. So police was like, okay, you saw all this by the river, take us to the area where you saw this that night. Crime scene investigators searched the area, but all they found at first was a few wood chippings. They didn't really find anything until they looked a little deeper, and they ran into an envelope that was addressed to none other than Helle Crafts. What was that doing there? Once they found that, then everything just started to unravel. The next thing that they found was a lot of hair follicles everywhere, and they were already thinking that it was most likely Helle, because like, who else would it be? They found a tooth crown, they found a fingernail with pink nail polish on it and a toenail, and then they found human tissue. Yep, it's time to go pick homeboy up. The hair that they found was blonde, and as we know, Helle did have blonde hair, so that was pretty consistent. In addition to that, they found other things as well. They found some blue fibers. They also found a small silver piece of metal. This was some very telling evidence. Now, they found the fingernail on top of a wall that was by the bridge, and it just so happened that the snow had recently melted, and that is how like all of these items sort of just kind of seemed like they appeared, but it was just because the snow had covered it before. At this point, investigators decided that they needed to get into that river and see what was down there, because if this was on the embankment, if this was on the bank of the river, imagine what kind of evidence was inside the river. So they teamed up with divers, and they found pieces of a chainsaw. Everything was taken into the forensics lab for testing. When they studied this chainsaw, they found that the serial number on the chainsaw had been scratched off, and like, that's weird. Okay, so I'm guessing obviously whoever used that chainsaw didn't want anybody to know the serial number, so it couldn't be traced back to where they purchased it. That's what I'm guessing. So at this point, police decide to release information to the media, hoping that it might help. So the media puts out its stories, and Helle Crafts' story is all over the media. It's all over the TV. It's all in the news, in the newspapers, back when they had newspapers. And Richard is considered a suspect. Now, Henry fought back. He told the media that he had nothing to do with his wife's disappearance, and that he had done a lie detector test and had passed, and the police were just harassing him, but that he didn't do anything. Of course, he was denying it. Although they did have a substantial amount of evidence at this point that something sinister had happened to Helle, unfortunately, they still did not have a body. They had pieces of a human body, but they didn't have a body, and it's just extremely difficult to prosecute or do anything. So forensic scientists went to work, and they analyzed the chainsaw again. They wanted to see if they could find anything that would prove that Helle had come to some sort of demise. So the first thing that they found on the chainsaw was some tiny skin tissues. They found some bizarre piece of fiber as well as hair and skin tissue on the chainsaw. I mean, if this isn't adding up, I don't know what is. I'm kind of surprised at them taking forever. Now, the fiber that was on the chainsaw chain, it was this bluish greenish color, and I think they said that it was cotton, but it was so tiny, it was almost microscopic in size, so it was very difficult to see it. It just so happened that Helle did own a bluish green cotton nightshirt, just like the fibers found on the chainsaw chain. So they wanted to find out who owned the chainsaw, but they couldn't because the chainsaw serial number was scratched. So because the serial number had been altered, they weren't able to tell who the chainsaw belonged to, but they wanted to find out. So what they did was they used this chemical solution, and this chemical solution helps to remove any layers that have been added to a metal surface, like any additional layers, like if someone tried to intentionally scrape it off or tamper with it, it would show that. Or if it happened due to natural causes like the water altered the chainsaw itself, then this chemical solution would remove that layer. Like if rust was on it, would remove the layer, and you would be able to see the base, like what was originally there. So they tried this technique and it worked, and they got their serial number. The serial number was 5921616. And when they checked their records, they found out that it matched the warranty that Richard had sent in for his chainsaw that he purchased. This was proof that Richard Crafts had in fact purchased that particular chainsaw. Then they wanted to find out whose hair follicles and teeth and skin tissue and fibers were down at the lake. So they tested all the hair follicles, the skin tissue, the teeth that they found, everything. The first thing that they noticed was that a lot of the hair follicles had been snipped or looked like they were clipped at the ends. And I mean, that was huge because obviously he had the wood chipper, which would slice everything. So that would make sense why all the hairs were like cut or clipped at the end. But still, they didn't know if it was Helle's hair or not. But in order for them to find out if it was Helle's hair, they would need some hair to compare it to, you know? They had no known source from Helle to compare the hair to. So the first thing they tried to do was they tried to take hair from a hairbrush of hers and see if that would work. So they weren't able to come up with an identical match, but they were able to conclude that the hairs found at the lake were very similar to Helle's hair that they got out of her brush. So the next thing they did was to compare the fingernail that they found with the pink nail polish on it to a bottle of nail polish that they found in the Crafts' home that belonged to Helle. And the results came back and they concluded that the polish found on the fingernail at the river was the exact same as the polish that Helle had used in her home multiple times. And this bottle of nail polish was actually found on Helle's nightstand, so we know that she was using it. This was proof that she had recently used the nail polish. Even with all of this, they still had the fact that they didn't find Helle's body hanging over their head. So the forensic pathologist, Dr. Lee, hired another expert to come in and take a look at the bones because he wanted to know if it was possible that they could identify Helle through maybe bone, which is probably a very good form, I think. But they wasn't sure if the wood chipper could actually crush bones, so they wanted to find that out first. So Dr. Lee purchased a huge wood chipper very similar to the one that Richard had, and he recreated what he thought may have happened using a pig. So I'm sorry guys, trigger warning right here. If you are very sensitive to animal cruelty or anything about animals being tested on or used for certain purposes, just skip ahead like 2-3 seconds, I would say. To create what they thought occurred, Dr. Lee purchased the same type of wood chipper that Richard had, and then they got a pig because pigs have very similar bone and tissue to human beings. So unfortunately they got a pig, and I don't know if the pig was alive or dead, I do not know, but they put a whole pig through the wood chipper because they wanted to find out how they wanted to see how it would break down human tissue and bones. And since pig is closer to human tissue and bones, they thought that that was the best possible. I don't know what they were thinking, guys. Like, I don't know. They studied the fragments from the wood chipper, the bones, the tissue, and everything like that. Also, they put wood through there as well because they wanted to see you know, how it would come out. All the lines and grooves in the bones of the pig, as well as the wood that they put through there, were an identical match to the wood chips that they found at the crime scene, proving that this was the same type of wood chipper and that a human body could actually go through a wood chipper and be broken down. Because there, at that point, there was some like argument as to whether or not, or validity as to whether or not, I should say, that the wood chipper could actually break down a human body, because they didn't know. So the other specialist that Dr. Lee brought in, his name was Dr. Harper, and he specialized in bone fragments. Dr. Harper studied the bone fragments under a spectrograph, and he was able to tell that the bones did come from a human because there was little tiny indentations and marks on the bones that led him to believe that the bones came from a blood vessel in the head, which only humans have and not animals. So that is how he came to the conclusion that the bones were that of a human. This led him to believe that these were skull fragments that came from the side of the head. Based on the forensic evidence that they found, they believed that she was certainly dead after she was put through the wood chipper. They just weren't sure if she was dead before. So this was something that they were kind of curious about and wanted to know. This was a huge break in the case because now they had the evidence that a human person was killed and put through that wood chipper. Whether it was Helle or not, they still didn't know. But for certain, somebody was put through that wood chipper, girl. So, listen. Why y'all out here putting people through wood chippers? You couldn't think of a better way? You couldn't just let her get a divorce? Like, why did you have to put her through a wood chipper? You already put her through enough. Next, Dr. Harper froze the fragments using liquid nitrogen, and he then ground them into like this small powder form. This was so he could be able to tell what type of blood type the person that had gone through the wood chipper had. And he was able to come to the conclusion that the blood type was O, the same as Helle's. What do we need? Do we need Helle to like get up out of the grave and be like, he did it? Or like what? Like, I mean, I think it's pretty obvious. Okay, this is not my best look to date, but I'm gonna work on it. So next they began to look at what they believe was the crown to a tooth, or the tooth to a tooth. Next, they began to examine what they believed was a crown to a tooth, but there was no human DNA located on the crown, so at least any that they could pull off, so they were unable to use that to identify the body. So they went to the next thing. They still need to be able to identify the body, or the fragments of the body, as Helle's in order to bring any sort of charges against anyone, or to say Helle was even dead. They didn't find any human tissue or remains of a human on that crown, so they weren't able to use that as an identification to the body. The crime scene investigators were sent back out to the lake to search it again to see if they could come up with anything else that would lead to the identification of the remains that they had. The crime scene investigators were out there for days, shifting around through the lakes, looking for everything, and they found nothing at first. One of the crime scene investigators had a pail of evidence that he had been picking up during his shifting through the water. He took the bucket into his tent and he began to wash his hands off in the bucket of water that he had been collecting evidence in. And as he was washing his hands off, lo and behold, what should come out but a tooth. That's right, a tooth. Not his tooth, but somebody's tooth came out in that pail of water. That is a pretty miraculous finding and a way to find evidence. I think that's just, I mean, the universe was on their side that day. The tooth was reviewed by a forensic odontologist, and they came to the conclusion that the tooth did in fact belong to Helle Crafts. Based on this evidence, the prosecutor was now able to bring a case against Richard and say that Helle Crafts was in fact dead due to the evidence and that they believed Richard was the perpetrator. They arrested Richard Crafts and charged him with Helle's murder. Thanks to forensic science and some good police work, Richard Crafts was convicted of murder and sentenced to 50 years in prison. Till this day, he continues to maintain his innocence, which we know is total crap. What did you guys think about this case and my makeup look? Please let me know in the comments down below. Don't kill me, but I do have to say this because it's just something I noticed with this palette. I normally do not give any sort of reviews at the end of videos, but if you can see how the glitter looks, yeah. So that happened with the glitter in this palette, and I just wanted to put that out there. So if you're going to go pick up this palette, do so knowing that is how the glitter reacts. I don't know, it just didn't react well. I even put on glitter primer, the NYX glitter primer, and it still reacted pretty poorly, which is sad because the color of the glitter is stunning. I just needed to say that so that you guys are aware if you pick up the palette. But besides that, I thought that the mask performed pretty well. And yeah, I'll see you guys next time with another true crime story time. Bye. What is wrong with me? I can't even wave correctly because I haven't done this in so long. Okay, Zahara, it's time to go. Okay, it's time to go. Okay, guys, bye.